Hi, this is Miss Huball. Today's video covers punctuation and capitalization, which is what we do in DGP on the fourth day, on Thursday. Now, punctuation and capitalization cover such a wide variety of topics that I won't be able to address all of them here. But I do have some tips to help you get through this section of your DGP successfully. The first slide deals with the rules that govern the punctuation of clauses when they are combined. All right? Now, this set of rules is easy to memorize and it is going to be key for you because it is going to help you to avoid making serious grammatical errors in your writing. So think about this. If all sentences are composed of only two kinds of clauses, independent and dependent clauses, that's every sentence you write, that's every sentence you speak. If you could figure out where the independent and dependent clauses are, and you could memorize this set of rules, you could eliminate a serious number of grammatical errors in your writing. I'm talking about run-ons, comma splices, fragments, those things which plague most writers your age. So here are the rules. If you have two independent clauses, you can combine them correctly two ways. You could put a semicolon in between them or a period. Now, a common mistake people make is to put two independent clauses together with a comma. That's called a comma splice. That's a grave grammatical error. Another error that people make is to just stick the two independent clauses together with no punctuation. That's a run-on sentence. That's a grave grammatical error. All right, next we have a combination of two independent clauses with a coordinate conjunction. That is one of the fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. If you combine two independent clauses with one of these conjunctions, you must put a comma. If you don't, you have a run-on sentence, which is a very serious grammatical error. Now, when you have dependent clauses thrown into the mix, sometimes you need a comma, sometimes you don't. If you have a dependent clause followed by an independent, you do need this comma here. That is a mandatory comma. Not having it is a grammatical error. However, if you've got an independent clause followed by a dependent clause, you do not need a comma between them. Now, say you've got an independent clause with a dependent clause plopped down in the middle of it. That is to say, you've got one independent clause bisected by a dependent clause. Sometimes you're going to have to set this dependent clause off with commas, and sometimes you don't. Here's how you tell the difference. Now, if the dependent clause is not essential to the meaning of the sentence, then you do put commas. If it is essential to the meaning of the sentence, you don't. And that kind of makes sense because if it's an interrupter, if it's something that detracts from the main idea, you are going to want to set that off with commas. And we'll do lots of examples. And sometimes I'm going to admit this is a tough call to make. Is it essential? Is it non-essential? When in doubt, you go ahead and put the commas. Now, many sentences that you speak and sentences that you write have more than two clauses. But the great thing about these rules is that you can combine them to help you punctuate. Say you begin with a dependent clause, then you have another independent clause, then an and an independent clause, then another dependent clause. You can use a combination of these rules to figure out how you should punctuate. Okay, there are lots of other necessary commas. This is a list of commonly occurring necessary commas. When you have an introductory prepositional phrase of 3 or more words, that requires a comma. When you have items in a series, 3 things, I devoured the burger, fries, and shake. You need those commas there. And a positive phrase that is non-essential needs to be set off with commas. Also, nouns of direct address always need a comma, whether they come at the beginning, the middle, or the end of the sentence. Of course, you know dates, cities, and states require commas. Now, the Oxford comma is this comma right here. The comma before the and when you have items in a series. Technically, it is no longer grammatically required. I do advise everybody to continue to put it because you never know when you'll come across an old-timer teacher who will want to see it. All right, so all contractions need an apostrophe. We know that. We got to be careful with your and your. Those contractions and that contraction and possessive pronoun are easily confused. It's and its. You just got to be careful with those. When you have a possessive noun, a noun that shows ownership, you're going to need an apostrophe. And that's pretty straightforward. You can't forget apostrophes. It does get a little confusing, excuse me, when you have words that end in S. For example, this is plural players. The apostrophe goes after. Thomas is a singular noun that ends in S. The apostrophe goes after. In common usage nowadays, newspapers, other publications, you'll see people adding an apostrophe S to words like players and Thomas. There are many ins and outs of when that's appropriate. Some common nouns, some proper nouns. It's not a grammatical error to put the apostrophe S, but to avoid confusion, I advise you to stick to the classic rules. Here's an important thing to note. Putting an apostrophe S almost never makes things plural. Okay, so that's not a good way to go. All right, colon is pretty straightforward when it's a time, but when do you use it in sentence writing? All right, I learned this when I was growing up, and I think it's a great rule of thumb. A colon can generally be replaced with the words and it is, or and there is, or and they are, or and there are. Okay, so if that punctuation mark can be replaced with these words, chances are the colon is being used correctly. If these words can't be substituted into the sentence, then probably a colon isn't going to work. Let me give you an example right here. There are many reasons for my anger, colon, and they are your tardiness, your disrespect, and your poor fashion sense. You see those words substituted at this particular spot in the sentence work, so the colon works. Check this one out. I was angry because, say we were going to put a colon here, of your tardiness, your disrespect, and your poor judgment. Okay, would these words substituted in after because be good? I was angry because, and they are, of your tardiness, your disrespect, and your poor judgment. No, it doesn't. And the reason why is because a colon doesn't go there. All right? So that's a good general rule with colons that works pretty much all the time. Keep that in your back pocket for the ACT because you will see it. Semicolons. We talked about combining two independent clauses with a semicolon. The only other time I think you're going to see it really is when you've got items in a series that require commas. For example, look at this one. I've lived in all these places. And so because they're cities and states, they need commas between. But then they also need a comma between each one so that you can follow the state and city rule. Well, that makes it completely confusing. Better to substitute the semicolon here, here, and here to make clear what you're doing. Okay? Now that doesn't come into play very often, but it is a rule and it is a proper use of a semicolon. All right. Quotation marks come very often in our writing, especially when we are using quoted material or when we're writing fiction that has dialogue. So you got to remember, generally speaking, the punctuation mark goes inside the quotation marks. All right? If you need specific help with this, you can pause the video right here and read through these rules. Next is punctuating and capitalizing titles. I find people struggle with this quite a bit. The rule of thumb is if it has a spine, you underline. That means books, for example, have spines, so their titles are underlined. Now you know when you're typing, we don't underline, we instead use italics. But when you're handwriting, you underline. So, for example, a chapter in a book, a short story in a book, a poem in a book. These things don't have spines. The book itself has a spine, but the chapter, the short story, and the poems do not. Therefore, you don't underline those titles. Instead, you use quotation marks. I've got a couple examples for you here. Look, Chapter 6, New York, in quotation marks. That's the title of the chapter. The Great Gatsby is the title of the book. The poem's name is Love Song. The book where you can find the poem is the Collective Poems of Dorothy Parker. So Love Song is in quotation marks. The name of the book, which has a spine, is italicized, or if I were handwriting, underlined. The same idea works for albums and songs and magazines and articles. Okay? Blackbird is the name of the song. The Beatles' White Album is the name of the album. The name of the article might be Why Joe Burrow is the GOAT. The name of the magazine is Sports Illustrated. Same with newspaper and newspaper articles and magazines. I'm trying to think of other examples, but I can't. All right, when you capitalize titles, the first word is always capitalized, like why. And then all major words of the title are also capitalized. Joe, Burrow, and GOAT. Okay. Love Song, both of these are capitalized. Alrighty, that's the end of my punctuation slideshow, and other specific incidences we'll cover in class quite a bit, but I hope this helped you complete day 4 of your DGP. Bye-bye.